Hello, I'm Francesca Maxime. Thanks so much for joining us here in New York City. You're watching Arise News Weekend, where we get some deeper insight into the stories making headlines all around the world. In this half hour, police on high alert in France over a threat of sleeper terror cells. And in the United States, more legal troubles for George Zimmerman. He's arrested again for another domestic violence charge. Plus, Filipino Catholics flock by the millions to an annual tradition. We have all these stories and much more straight ahead. Thanks so much for joining us. Our top story at this hour begins in France, where police are on high alert. They have been told to erase their presence on social media and carry their weapons at all times because of active sleeper terrorist cells. More than 1,100 troops have been deployed in the Paris region alone. This comes after French security forces launched attacks on 2 terror suspects Friday. The suspects took hostages and held themselves up in 2 different locations. Julian Oche has more.
Forensics teams begin their investigation Friday night in eastern Paris, where a deadly hostage siege ended hours earlier. 4 hostages were killed along with one of the hostage takers when police raided a kosher supermarket. The gunman was killed, but his 26-year-old partner, Ayat Boumadine, remains at large. The incident happened shortly after police stormed the hideout of brothers Sharif and Saeed Kouachi, who were also suspects in the deadly shooting at a satirical newspaper earlier in the week. They were both killed by police. French prosecutors told reporters there was evidence the gunmen in both incidents knew each other. Sharif Kouachi's spouse had called Ayat Boumadine more than 500 times. An audio recording posted online Friday, purportedly by the leader of the Yemeni branch of al-Qaeda, said the attacks were prompted by insults to prophets, but didn't claim direct responsibility for the attacks.
And French authorities say that they now believe that Hayat Boumediene may have entered Syria via Turkey. They also believe that she may have actually left France as early as a week ago on January 2nd. For a roundup now of the latest news on the terror situation in Paris, we are joined by Arise News correspondent Sarah Firth in the French capital at the kosher supermarket. That, of course, is the location of the second shooting. Sarah?
Well, we're here outside that supermarket where one of the 2 sieges that took place yesterday ended with the gunman going into the supermarket and shooting dead the gunman, who was named as Amadi Chulabali. Now, 4 hostages died in that siege yesterday. It's thought that happened at the beginning of the siege when the gunman had entered the supermarket and fired his weapons. Of course, at the same time yesterday, you had the second siege that was taking place about 20 miles outside of Paris in Damatan, with the 2 brothers who it's thought were behind the attack on the Charlie Hebdo offices earlier in the week. And that siege also ending with the gunman being shot dead by the police. A tragic turn of events for France over the last few days in what's been described as the worst terror attacks for many decades, and really a very wary city today in Paris. People that we've been speaking to saying that they're very aware of the heightened security. They're very scared about the implications of these attacks, but at the same time, a real sense of determination amongst many of the people we've spoken to stand up to this attack and to not be divided. And that message of unity is really one that we've heard echoed right from the very top, from the French President Francois Hollande down to the people on the streets. Now, tomorrow in Paris, you're going to have a massive unity rally, and that's bringing world leaders here to the streets of Paris. They're going to be taking part in that from all around the world. The British Prime Minister will be here, and many, many other world leaders. It's thought possibly up to 1 million people might attend that. And of course, absolutely at the forefront of France's security forces' mind is making sure that that all goes off safely. At the same time, there are undoubtedly going to be very tough questions for France's security services and police, because the gunman here who was shot dead, Amedy Choulibaly, and the two Kouachi brothers who were shot dead outside of Paris in Damatan, they were all known, it's thought, to the French security services, and they were on US and European watch lists. So the big questions are going to be as to why, if they were on security services radar, why it was that they managed to slip through the net. Of course, this issue of security, and already the links are being made between the gunmen that carried out these two sieges and the attack on the Charlie Hebdo offices. And different groups, the Islamic State have been mentioned, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula have been mentioned. The security forces are going to be looking very, very closely at the moment as to what was the what type of links there were and how exactly it came about. As we said, those gunmen managing to slip through the net and catch security forces off guard in the way that they did. You had 12 people killed at the Charlie Hebdo offices at the beginning of the couple of days of terror, halfway through the week when these offices were attacked at the satirical magazine, and many more injured. That was just the start. You then had the two gunmen in a very dramatic scenes fleeing from police, and that showdown happening, as we said, 20 miles outside of Paris in a printing factory in Damatan. And here are separate gunmen outside this supermarket taking hostages, and sadly 4 hostages being killed in that siege. All throughout today, you've had people coming here and laying flowers and lighting candles and paying tribute. And everyone we've spoken to in a very solemn mood, but as we said, a real sense of determination that the city, France, that holds so dear those issues and ideals of freedom of expression, that those won't be ruined by what has taken place here. Been a tragic few days for France, and ending with that bloody showdown with the police killing the 3 gunmen. And now I think with the unity rally taking place on Sunday, France really going to be looking for a way to come together and start the healing process. Back to you, Francesca.
All right, Sarah Firth reporting for us from Paris, France. Well, today, Palestinians in France took to the streets to protest those attacks on the Charlie Hebdo magazine. The demonstration was arranged by a Palestinian association in France. The country recently voted to support Palestinian statehood in recent non-binding resolutions. Well, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry paying a visit to the French embassy in Washington, D.C. There, Kerry signing a condolence book for the victims and calling France, quote, a great ally. Looking to the future, though, French President François Hollande says, quote, national unity is the best weapon against future security threats. Gillian Kitchener has more on that.
Arc de Triomphe shines in support for satirical weekly Charlie Hebdo, after 2 suspects wanted for Wednesday's grisly attack were killed by anti-terrorist police. The dramatic police assault in a small northern town was echoed at a Jewish supermarket northeast of Paris, where a siege ended with a gunman dead, along with 4 hostages. This man says he was shocked as he watched the operation unfold, standing just 50 meters away.
How can I say? First, there were some loud shots of what I imagined to be mortar fire, and then the rest you can imagine.
La France, elle a fait face.
French President François Hollande confirmed hostages were killed and warned that France has not seen an end to such brutal security threats. He says national unity is France's best weapon against radical extremists.
Enfin, nous devons nous mobiliser.
Finally, we must mobilize. We must be capable to respond to attacks by force that we are forced to use, but also by solidarity. This solidarity, we must show it always. We are a free people who give in to no pressure, who is not afraid, because we carry an ideal which is bigger than us.
France is planning a unity rally on Sunday with a guest list of European leaders, while at the same time, French authorities are trying to prevent a rise in vengeful anti-immigrant sentiment.
Well, still to come, a look at the rise of xenophobia in the European Union. You're watching Arise News Weekend.
The best way to predict the future is to create it.
There's a special breed of achievers out there that are called tomorrow's people, the highly creative ones who live in the future. They imagine what will be and strive to make it happen. They are bold. They refuse to wait for the future. Tomorrow bends and conforms to their ideas. At Access Bank, we share the same sentiments. We've been able to grow our bank to become a leading player in Nigeria with a strong presence across the continent, adopting best practice in everything we do. Our mantra for success is simple: speed, service, and security. Those who shape tomorrow strive for and demand perfection. At Access Bank, our service culture of speedy response and drive for excellence is the blueprint for creating customer experiences that will echo for generations. Come, let's work together and take tomorrow.
Well, even before the heinous murders in Paris this week, there's been discussion within the European Union regarding increasing xenophobia, nationalism, and movements to keep certain ideologies or religions tamped down. Stefano Acunto is a trustee of the European School of Economics. Thanks for joining us again on Arise News Weekend.
Thank you, Francesca.
Well, we have seen the rising tide of xenophobia, folks that are against certain religions and against certain ethnicities. Talk to me about why this is happening in the EU right now.
Well, it's really rather deep. It's happened for a number of years. First, with the resistance to the European Union in the first place. I mean, I recall in Italy and in France, great resistance to a new coinage. And on top of that, you've had growing, shall I say, dissatisfaction with the economy, which normally breeds the targeting of groups or of causes that are outside the normal ones for economics. You've had a movement in Europe against the, quote, invasion of Roma, people from Romania who used to be characterized as gypsies, throughout Europe with no barriers to stop them. You've had anti-Semitic flare-ups in Hungary, organized. Germany, UK, and of course this Paris attack was anti-Semitic as well.
And even in Toulouse in 2012 before that.
Exactly. One of the things I think is happening is there's an expression that's being used now, homesick even though we're home, because of the changes in the overall the demographics, but more than the demographics, the feeling of being parceled and invaded. You know, these areas in France where there are no entry zones, et cetera, that sort of thing.
Sure. Well, I think that a lot of Europeans, especially, for example, Italians, they feel a lot of the Northern African migrants that continue to come by boat, and they're sort of consuming. They feel sometimes the labor jobs that they might have, especially when the economy isn't so great. So tell me how that fuels and feeds into it, because it's really sort of partly about the way you think, but also about the jobs that you may or may not be able to get.
Well, the feeling that you're right. There is definitely a concern about jobs, although the way it rolls out in Italy and Germany and France is that many of those people who are coming to the shores of, for example, of Sicily, are those who's taking jobs that Italians, French, and German children wouldn't normally want. Mm-hmm. But the other side of that equation is an interesting one, and there is a feeling that there are no guardrails, that there is simply an invasion of an open border invasion, no quantification worth having, and that already the economic situation being bad and the deflation, the euro down, it sets a pace of malaise that you can't come back from.
We know that about 50,000 French Jews have tried to, inquire about going back to Israel and resettling there because they don't feel comfortable in France anymore, and about 10,000 might even do so, within the next year or so. Talk to me about, how that puts a country really at odds with itself.
Well, it is a divided country right now. You have, first of all, Marine Le Pen on the right, who has gotten, I think, 22% of the vote and is likely to get more in the next election. You have Muslim communities with Muslim leaders who have now gotten councillor posts and so on in their municipalities. You've got historic anti-Semitism in France. It's historic. I mean, the J'accuse goes back to quite a while. So what you've got is a country where there are shifts in demography that are playing out along non-state lines. So the state is one thing, but the religious sector is divided amazingly. And of course, the well-being in France, where there is a social division in income, has become exaggerated.
Steve Acunto, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much for your insights on that. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Francesca. Thank you.
All right, now we're going to go from xenophobia to inclusivity after the Paris attacks. Many people, of course, are saying, why can't we all get along? And why does there continue to be all of this bloodshed? Earlier, I spoke with Sahar Al-Salani, who is a board member of the Council on American Islamic Relations and also lives in Stony Point Center, which is home to a multi-faith community that's dedicated to the practice and the study of hospitality, nonviolence, and justice. And I started off asking her for her reaction to last week's attacks.
Well, like most of the rest of the world, I was upset. I was disgusted. Any act of violence against a non-aggressor is completely against any of our religious principles, any of the world's religious principles. When I had first heard about the cartoons, of course I was offended. Any attack on any religious figure offends me, whether it's against our prophet, whether it's against Jesus or Moses, peace be upon them, whether it's against Mother Teresa, or whether it's against my neighbor. Any act of slander is unacceptable to me. Well, those cartoons in particular, some say were blasphemous, but how would you, as a Muslim media marketing professional, how would you react to that? I would probably follow the standards that I take from most of the religious figures that I aspire to be like. Prophet Muhammad, during his time, was offended many times throughout his ministry. He chose to walk away, as I'm sure Prophet Jesus did, as I'm sure the Buddha did. Any great leader is usually faced with a lot of criticism. I personally believe they would have risen above it because they have much bigger things, much bigger picture to worry about. I would probably counter it with enlightenment, with education, with dialogue. I wouldn't fight fire with fire. Yeah, try to let it calm down a little bit. Well, we do know that there are a couple of social media hashtags out there that are trending, Je suis Charlie, and also Je suis Ahmed, and now Je suis Juif. How do you think social media plays a part in perhaps raising awareness of some of the divisions, but also in your work, which is bringing people together of the interfaith communities? Well, with any kind of freedom of speech comes great responsibility. The media has the responsibility to bring people together and to inform people. I am a big proponent of free speech. One of the things that these hashtags do remind us is that Muslims were not immune to any of the violence that, Muslim people were. As in 9/11, as in the rest of the terrorist acts around the world, Muslims are also victim to that. Because the police officer who was guarding the Charlie Hebdo offices that was gunned down was in fact a Muslim. And a copy editor was also Muslim. He was as well. So again, affecting everyone, this kind of violence that we see. Do you feel that moderate Muslims do in fact have a duty to somehow explain, radical extremism? Well, being a media professional, I do know what brings in ratings, and I do see how the media tends to be biased and focuses on stories that bring a lot of attention. Mainstream media, you have to remember, 1.5 billion people, 1/5 of the world's population, happen to be Muslim, and they are active, productive members of society. And also doing a lot of things like Muslims for Ferguson and Green Muslims. Tell me about your work in those organizations. Well, a lot of Muslims have been active in the climate justice movement and the social justice movement. I spent a few weeks in Ferguson myself. A lot of people are involved with relief efforts. Part of being a Muslim is striving for justice. As with any of other collective faiths, Islamic Relief is one of the biggest worldwide relief agencies in the country. Red Cross's sister organization, Red Crescent, is one of the biggest disaster relief organizations. I think as a media professional, we should strive to unite people and remind people about charitable efforts and improving the status of the world rather than dividing and spreading hatred. And focusing always on exactly these kind of bloody episodes. Sahar Al-Salani, thank you so much for joining us today on Arise News Weekend. We really appreciate your insights today. Oh, thank you so much for having me. And you're watching Arise News Weekend.
Well, Arise is the only network that really covers comprehensively the African diaspora. It gives people in other parts of the world of color a chance to know about people here in the United States, us to know about them, and the world to know about us. So it's kind of an educational experience for everybody involved. Getting to know people through stories, through personal stories. You really get a chance to know what people are actually all about, what communities are about. How are we different? But more importantly, what commonalities we all share.
Welcome back to Arise News Weekend. Well, George Zimmerman, you'll remember he's the man acquitted by a Florida jury in the death of an unarmed black teenager, Trayvon Martin. Well, he has been arrested yet again. The 31-year-old was arrested by police in Florida, accused of assault and domestic violence with a weapon. Zimmerman was found not guilty in the 2012 shooting death of Martin in a Florida neighborhood. He says the teenager, who was unarmed, attacked him at the time. After the acquittal, Zimmerman was later arrested on other domestic violence charges. To Colorado now, where the FBI says an attack against an NAACP office is, in fact, a case of domestic terrorism. Police are still searching for a suspect in the case. The FBI says the homemade bomb was set off near the NAACP office in Colorado Springs on Tuesday. Nobody was injured. Well, a U.S. judge has sentenced radical Imam Abu Hamza al-Masri to life in prison after being found guilty of federal terrorism charges. Nathan Frandino has more.
Life in prison for Abu Hamza al-Masri. A U.S. District Court judge sentenced the radical London imam in New York on Friday. Hamza was convicted in May on terrorism-related charges, including his role in the 1998 kidnapping of Western tourists in Yemen that left 4 hostages dead. Hamza has maintained his innocence. His attorney, Sam Schmidt, urged a shorter sentence.
And I think that there should have been a sentence of a number of years to allow him, whether it's in his 70s or his 80s, if he survives that long in the Bureau of Prisons, to spend some time with his family.
Hamza gained notoriety for his fiery sermons in London. U.S. and U.K. officials said he inspired a generation of militants. He was also convicted of sending 2 followers to Oregon to start a militant training camp. At his sentencing, the judge cited his speeches in which he justified killing non-Muslims and praised the September 11th attacks.
Touts a free college education. You're watching Rise News Weekend.
If I was building my own network, it would be for the people, by the people. It would be very diverse. It would be with every culture you can think of.
If I was to start my own news network, it would reflect positive and negative within the continents and the countries around the world.
I think that I would be more looking towards young people.
If I were to build my own news network, it would look like New York City. Old, young, fresh, hip, classic.
If I was to build my own news network, I would just have people who from all over who are very connected and diverse.
If I was to build my own news network, my own world network, I would love a correspondent in every country, every location, every city. I mean, it's kind of unrealistic, but how cool would it be to get local stories from the impoverished country, the impoverished city that we don't know about?
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Because we live in a global, interconnected world, business news no longer stops when the markets close on Wall Street. And what we've discovered over the past few years of the financial crisis is that events and news that happen even in the smallest countries impact the United States and the world at large. As we bring together experts and analysts and thought leaders and CEOs and companies across many industries to not only provide the macroeconomic view, but news everyday people can use.
Welcome back to Arise News Weekend. Well, President Obama is taking his plan to offer free community college to students on the road. Speaking on Friday, the president says that his plan would ultimately save 9 million people $3,800 a year in tuition.
Every American, whether they're young or just young at heart, should be able to earn the skills and education necessary to compete and win in the 21st century economy. So, today, I'm announcing an ambitious new plan to bring down the cost of community college tuition in America. I want to bring it down to 0. I want to make it free. I want to make it free. Community colleges should be free for those willing to work for it. Because in America, a quality education cannot be a privilege that is reserved for a few. I think it's a right for everybody who's willing to work for it.
Well, you can be willing to work for it, but get this, right? The administration estimates that it would cost about $6 billion a year, but they haven't quite said yet how they're going to fund the program. All right, well, Mitt Romney, you'll remember him, Republican. He might give a try at the White House another go. The 2012 Republican nominee, losing to President Obama, of course, told a meeting of donors that he is considering yet another run for the White House.
Barack Obama has failed America. When he took office, the economy was in recession, and he made it worse, and he made it last longer. 3 years later, over 16 million Americans are out of work or just quit looking for jobs. Millions more are unemployed. 3 years later, unemployment is still above 8%, and that was the figure he said his stimulus would keep from happening. 3 years later, foreclosures are still at record levels. 3 years later, the prices of homes continue to fall. 3 years later, our national debt has grown nearly as large as our entire economy.
Well, if Romney does decide to go ahead, this would be his third try. He ran in 2008, but failed to win the GOP nomination. Well, the protests do continue against Bill Cosby. Cosby performing in Hamilton, Ontario, Friday night. Some audience members standing up during the show, and they started chanting, "We believe the women." It was the third show for Cosby in Canada this week. Protesters were outside the venue at all of those shows. Cosby has been embattled with more than a dozen, up to really 30, sex abuse allegations in the past 3 months. He has not been charged in any of them. Well, the gospel world is mourning the loss this week of pioneer and legend Andre Crouch, a 7-time Grammy winner. Crouch wrote his first gospel song, "The Blood Will Never Lose Its Power," at the age of 14. He also helped pioneer the Jesus rock movement of the late 60s and 70s. Crouch also crossed over into the pop world, collaborating with such artists like Diana Ross, Ringo Starr, and even most famously on Madonna's Like a Prayer and Michael Jackson's Man in the Mirror. Crouch died on Thursday after suffering a heart attack, and he was 72. Let's leave you now with a little bit of his music. You're watching Arise News Weekend.
Let me tell you that through it all, oh yes, oh, I've learned to depend upon His word. Every child of God.
There's certain news programs that have a Democrat and a Republican, and all they do is, here's the Democrat saying his side, and the Republicans say, you know, it's a little debate show, but not everybody is a sort of an extremist on one side or the other. People are in the middle a lot more.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Well, in the Philippines, millions of people flocked to an open-air mass to celebrate the country's traditional Black Nazarene procession. The Catholic feast draws millions of worshipers in a day-long march through the streets of the Philippine capital, Manila. Devotees waved white towels as they walked with the statue toward the minor basilica of the Black Nazarene. The Black Nazarene is a life-size black statue of Jesus Christ carved in Mexico in the 17th century. Followers of the icon believe it has healing powers and can answer prayers. Thanks so much for joining us for Rise News Weekend. If you're on Twitter, find me at Francesca Maxime. We'll see you tomorrow.